Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the True to Form podcast. I am your host, Audrey Neff, and I am so excited about today's guest. After weeks and weeks of texting back and forth, we finally got Olivia Salmen on the podcast with us. She really is probably someone that needs no introduction. I'm sure most of us, all of our listeners already follow her on one of her many social platforms, but I do want to read your bio really quickly just because I want to set the stage and then there's some things I want to add. But for those of you guys who don't know Olivia, she's amazing, but she is an advanced aesthetic nurse, injector, and board certified plastic surgical nurse with over 9 years of experience in plastic surgery and 8 years as an injector. And she is one of only 350 certified plastic surgical nurses in the US and one of only 14 in the state of Tennessee. She trains for Allergan Medical Institute, Revance, Master Injector Series, and she was also nominated and won Best Injector of Nashville. Beyond that, she is a social media guru. That's an understatement, probably. So on Instagram, she has, 135,000 followers, TikTok, 187,000. And beyond that, though, because the reason I wanted to share that bio is when I read that bio, like, you're obviously a very impressive human on paper. But what I want to add to that is beyond her incredible background and everything that she does, she's a really genuine and incredibly kind soul. And I'm really grateful that our paths crossed, Olivia, because you're really you're a breath of fresh air and your energy is very contagious. So that's something I love about you. So Olivia, welcome to the True to Form podcast.
Thank you. Audrey, I could just sit on here and listen to you gas me up all day. You're so sweet. No, I was so excited when we met. Gosh, what was it? Maybe last year or 2 years ago? I don't remember. We met
I can't
in Miami.
remember.
Like our paths just keep
Yes.
crossing. It's been so fun. Just the conference circuit is so nice for how it connects people. But yeah, that's pretty much my professional background. Otherwise, I'm from Nashville, Tennessee, born and raised in Tennessee, and I practiced at a plastic surgery office here. I just finished my NP, so I'm super excited about that. Thank
Yay.
goodness I'm done with nurse practitioner school. But yeah, I've been training for about 5.5 years or so of my injecting career. And gosh, I think I love it as much as I love injecting. I love having the split where I get to see patients part of my week and then get to train part of the week because you just don't get burnout on either one. So it's been a really fun shift in my career the past 5 or 6 years to kind of get to do both and just to get to like travel and meet so many people with it too.
Yeah, I love it. And if we back up a couple of steps now, because something I really admire about you, and I'm a transparent person. That's why this
Mhm.
podcast, why I called it True to Form, is it's super transparent and authentic.
Yeah.
But you're 31, correct? 31 years young. So I
Yeah.
love that. I'm 31 too. So I love that about you because I think something that I think to me, it's really inspiring to see someone as young as age 31 have such a profound impact on the
Mm.
industry. You're certainly, a woman that so many people in this industry follow, look up to, learn from, and probably aspire to be in some way, shape, or form one day. So I think that's something really inspiring is to see the amount of success that you've had at such a young age. So that's why I gravitate towards you. I feel like is because we are the
Yeah.
same age, and
I
I
love
definitely want to get
it.
into that. But if we back up a couple of steps, like what landed you in aesthetics? Because I feel like a lot of times people they do the route in the hospital or whatever it may be, and then they make that transition later in their career. So I'm
Yeah.
curious, and I know our listeners want to probably know. So I think it'd be cool if you could go into your background and your journey.
100%. So, yeah, 10 years ago when I finished undergrad, honestly, it was still at a point 10 years ago where it wasn't as talked about. Like in my nursing class, no one was thinking about going into aesthetics. Where I'd say
Yeah.
now, graduating nursing classes, probably like 50% of these graduates have thought about it. So back then, it was so niche seeming, even though the field existed, it just wasn't very talked about, that I think I just got in immediately, and that's how I have gotten so far so young because I started in plastics at 22. I was a baby. And so I was brand new out of school, and I knew as a nurse that I wanted to do something in surgery because I didn't know about aesthetics, that was necessarily an option as a career path. I got into plastics and I worked on the surgical side of plastics for about a year and a half or so before Dr. Moore, who I still work for and love, I've been with him my whole 10-year career. He wanted to train me to inject because he said when we were in surgery, he said I was good with my hands. Hey, would you want to try to be an injector when I would help him with facelifts and things like that? So he started training me, and it just kind of took off from there. That I did it in the way that I think is kind of the fastest way you can get into it straight out of school. I went right into plastics. I got really in-depth anatomy knowledge for 2 years, hands-on facelifts. Jumped into ejecting right after that. What was that, like end of 2016, 2017? And it just kind of took off from there, but it wasn't so saturated yet that I do attribute some of it to that. Like my timing was impeccable, and that wasn't even my own doing. But the timing was really good. Dr. Moore had a lot of faith in me to be able to do it. And then that is just my personality of I went into medicine, but I feel like my personality gears a lot towards almost kind of entrepreneurship. Like I really kind of have that mindset of even though I'm employed in this practice, it really is kind of you eat what you kill, you do it on your own. And so that really helps you in this industry because you've got to find a way to combine medicine with sales. And you've got to be able to not necessarily sell the product, but sell yourself. Like I have to convince you, you can trust me with your face. I know what I'm doing. Even when I had only been injecting for 3 months, you have to convey that you know your stuff. And so that can be hard when you're green because you're nervous and you don't know as much as someone that's been in it 15 years. That you've kind of got to embody that personality. And that can be a hard thing to teach, but I try to in some of my private trainings to kind of go that route as well. Yes, we need to talk about anatomy, injecting, how to get your great results, but we got to work on your consultation too. If you can't
Mhm.
get that across, no one's going to let you put needles in their face. So I think doing that from the get go was really, really helpful. And that's kind of how I got my foot in the door with it. So my advice to people trying to get into aesthetics is step one, you've got to get hired probably at either a plastic surgery office or a derm office, and it's not going to be as an injector. Very, very rarely are they going to hire someone to be an injector with no experience just because you're nice, because it's really expensive to train you. It was really expensive for Dr. Moore to train me. So if you can get your foot in the door, you learn all of the back end stuff about aesthetics or about plastics, and then you're pretty knowledgeable once you start injecting. And so many people want to just jump right into injecting, and I get it. And I'll see people fresh out of school open up their own med spa with zero experience. That's so
Mhm.
terrifying.
Mhm.
So that's really the main two ways. When I get DMs asking me how to get into it, I'm like, apply for any job in plastics and derm. Do that for minimum 1 year. Two would be even better. And then you're going to be more eligible.
Yeah. I love that. And there's a million things I could go into now. So I love what you said, and I agree because we do see a lot of people because now that we're seeing this huge, we're seeing one an exodus from the hospitals, but then we're also seeing, just like you said, RNs that want to jump right into aesthetics. And to kind
Yeah.
of reiterate how you put it, like you can't skip all these steps. You
Mm-mm.
can't just expect that, yeah, like you said, it costs so much money to
So
train
much.
constantly train because it,
Hmm.
it involves constant training over your career and
I
advancing your
still
craft
train.
and skill set. Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly, we're all
I still
forever
train
students of
myself.
life and
Yeah.
mhm, in whatever
Hmm.
craft that we specialize in. So I love that you can't skip steps. Everybody starts from the bottom too.
Yeah.
And that's every master injector in this industry started from ground zero. So I
100%.
love that you put that, and that's a good and powerful piece of advice for our
Hmm.
listeners, especially young professionals that are either new to the industry, fresh to the industry, or looking to, break in. But something I want to go into a little bit more in detail, and I love how you put it, and you're speaking my language now. You said you have to learn how to combine medicine with sales.
Hmm.
So this is where I want to start. And for some reason in this industry, because it is medicine at the end of the day,
Hmm.
aesthetics is it's a form of medicine.
Yeah.
A lot of providers get very uncomfortable with the word sales, selling,
Yeah.
whatever it may be, because we have this ethics to uphold, let's call it.
Hmm.
So going into the consultation process, you said you need to sell yourself, and that
Yeah.
is so true. And
Yeah.
a lot of people struggle with it. So this is
Hmm.
where I want you to dive into first, just because you brought it up. So now my mind's going a million miles an hour on this topic. I want to start with this topic first. So
Yeah.
go into like how you approach the consultation, how you sell yourself, how you
Hmm.
build your treatment plans, and all of that.
Yeah. So, number one, I think you have to be a bit of a chameleon. That's not to say you conform your personality to anybody you're around,
Yeah.
but you realize who's really nervous, who do you have to hold their hand a little bit more, you have to read the room, who is there, they've had Botox 100 times and they're just ready to get in and out, get down to business, right? You have to kind of be that chameleon. You're not going to be the exact same provider for every person. So reading that room, if you have a new patient where you're probably going into a lot of detail because you are really selling them on it. They're not already sold on it. They've not had it before. The first thing I always do is after it's just like friendly introduction, is I say, okay, first, tell me anything you've had before, just because I want to know what you've had done so I know what you're familiar with. And they say nothing. I know I've got to go to the root of the education, right? If you've had neurotoxin and filler before, I can skip one level of that. Let's say they've had nothing. Then I hand them the mirror and I just say, okay, now I just want you to go through every single thing you have a question about, and that way I can give you options. And if you want me to do a full face assessment, I'll do that too, just for facial balancing. And I always throw in that part because you'll see who really is interested in that and who is maybe there for truly just their lips. And you don't need to spend 45 minutes talking about full face when they're there for one thing and you're never going to talk them into something else. You're just wasting your time at that point, and then it comes across salesy. So you kind of
Yeah.
read who's even interested in that full conversation and who's not. Not everybody gets the full conversation in my chair. So once they've pointed out everything that they dislike or that they want to potentially change, there is a delicate way to go about it where you're not just pointing out quote unquote flaws on someone's face. I really try to talk about it in an anatomy standpoint. So let's say we're talking about someone's jowl, for example. It's always a sensitive subject because the word jowl is bad. No one wants jowls. They don't want you to notice that they have jowls. So let's say they just say, oh, yeah, I just want like a sharper chin and jawline. And I know it's because they have a jowl. I will talk about it as breaks in the tissue. I'm like, okay, so see this little break in the tissue here? You've got shadowing here. If we add volume there, that helps with the shadowing. Or if they're broken in the tissue on the back of their jaw, I talk about the anagonial notch. So for the medical providers listening, that's a good way to talk about jowl formation without saying you have a jowl. If it's a sensitive patient that you're not really wanting to, because people get offended. I have patients come in that say, I went somewhere else and she made me feel like I was so ugly. And I'm like, oh, that breaks my heart because they pointed out all these things on her face that she hadn't noticed. You have to be careful. So if they're
Mhm.
saying like, okay, jawline's a concern, I say, you see this notch in the back of your jawline? I say that's actually something that just gets deeper with age because just like water erodes rock, there's a blood vessel right there that literally erodes your bone. That's why you're noticing it. You talk about it like that. It's not calling their anatomy ugly. It's just saying, this is what's happening. I can fix it. I can put volume back there. So be so careful with your word choice because people take that to heart for sure. And if you go about it from anatomy, talk about shadows as opposed to like bulges. It makes people feel more confident. So that's kind of the way I go about it. And I just work top to bottom. So anything they've talked about, I just start at the hairline, I go down to essentially the collarbone. And I like to go neurotoxin before filler. I just talk straight neurotoxin and then through straight filler. And then we talk about skin if we're talking about regenerative after that. And at the end, sometimes that can be a lot. If I went through all of that, I've talked about products, prices, everything. I've got a form that I'll write it down on, but I'll just say to them, I'm like, okay, I know that's a lot, but that was a full facial assessment. No one does all that in one day. What I now need you to do is tell me what your priorities are, and I'll tell you if the order is appropriate. Because there's some things we need to do before others. It's like, but this is not something we're going to do in a day. Consider this even maybe a
Yeah.
year-long treatment plan. And I'll say, I just told you, sometimes I'll tell them what I have in my face. And I'll say, do you think I did that in one day? No, I've been in plastics for 10 years. So it's a process and it kind of takes the weight off of them if I might have just told them $10,000 worth of stuff.
Mhm.
So that's the way I go about it. And then it puts it back in their pocket where I'm not deciding what they use out of their wallet. They are, but they know
Right.
exactly what I'd recommend just based on their anatomy.
Yeah. I love the attention to detail, and thank you for going into detail, by the way.
Mhm.
I was writing so many notes because I love and I mean this immensely too, is I love how you talked about your intentional word choice.
Mhm.
Because just like you said, a lot of injectors, like I'm not an injector, obviously, but you're trained on this clinical vernacular to use. And in
Mhm.
some cases, it can, just like you said, the last thing you want is a patient coming to you and they feel like they're flawed or they're ugly. So
Right.
I love how you're intentional about being a chameleon, like you said, but then changing the word choice. and you
Hmm.
don't want to make them feel flawed. And you just like, we're all only human, we're all going to
Right.
age. So I like that you take that approach, because if we put ourselves in the patient's shoes too, I mean, we're in this industry, so like we're all about, doing everything we possibly can. But for new people to the
Hmm.
industry, it can be a really, I don't want to use the term embarrassing, but an
Yeah.
uncomfortable scenario to sit in a treatment room, a consultation with a mirror and pointing out things that you don't like about your
Yes.
face. So I like that you're very intentional
Hmm.
with your word choice. And then you do the full facial analysis, and
Hmm.
then you ask them what their priorities are. So
Hmm.
I want to go into around, because I feel like the pushback I get from a lot of providers in the industry is every patient is looking for the best deal or whatever
Hmm.
it may be. So how do you sell like value versus price?
Yes. So I have trainees ask me that a lot. They're like, okay, well, what if you quote them 2 to 3 syringes for their cheeks and they say they can't afford it, they can only do one, something like that, where again, it's back in their budget in their pocket. Or sometimes patients will ask for a specific product because they have a coupon. So sometimes it's okay, you recommended I use this, but what if I use this instead because I have a coupon for it through a reward program, right? And so I
Mm-hmm.
just always say to the trainees, I'm like, to be 100% honest with you, I don't give them a choice. Like they can leave and not do anything, but I'm not
Yeah.
going to let them pick product. That's a slippery slope.
Yep.
You have to stand by what you said, not only because it's what you recommended, but it also like they're going to keep doing it to you. If you let them dictate the product when they know nothing about
Mm-hmm.
product. You do. You're the one that's educated on that. You have to stand behind what you recommended. Hey, I recommended this one because it has this stretch or this strength. I need it for the result I'm going to give you. It's different from this product. Sorry, you can't use that one. You
Yep.
can't float on that. And same thing with amount of syringes or budget. I'll say, oh, okay, I totally understand. We've got to stay around $1,000 today. We'll just wait on your cheeks because if I do one syringe in your cheeks, I know you're going to be underwhelmed. Why don't we just wait on that today? We'll do your lips, or today we'll just do your
Yep.
tox. And you just make it definitive. If you start to get wishy-washy on it, they'll go a little harder at you because they're smelling fear.
Mm-hmm.
And they'll smell a potential deal where they're trying to see what they can get out of you. Be very confident in what you charge. Your education was expensive. All the
Mm-hmm.
trainings you go to are expensive. You are worth what you're charging. And know that if they do go somewhere else to get a deal, if they don't like the result, you're going to get that patient back and then they're going to be loyal to you. That's happened to me over the years. I've had patients that didn't want to pay what I was charging. They left. I see them back later and they come in with their tail between their legs. They're like, I'm so sorry. Can you fix this? And of course, I'm not mad at them. They went and tried it out. It didn't work. Come on back. We'll fix it. And then they become very loyal. So don't feel like you're actually losing patients by telling them the truth about what they need or turning them away if they're not a good candidate for something. It always works in your favor. I'm extremely picky with who I treat.
Mm-hmm.
Not to say that I fire people or anything, but I turn down treatments a lot, and it has always worked in my favor. So,
Yeah. I love that. And I'm so glad you brought that up, because so many, just like you said, a lot of providers ask you, how you deal with that. And that's a question I get asked on a daily basis. And I love how you put it as well. Like, you have to be confident in what you charge and what your
mhm,
expertise and skill set brings to the table. And if people are looking for the cheapest in town, for the most part, that's probably not someone's ideal customer or ideal
sure.
patient in this industry, is someone that's constantly looking for a deal. And then, like you said, they'll remember you though. And if they do come back, with their tail
Mhm,
between their legs, you still ended up converting that patient.
yeah.
So I love that. And all providers need to be confident in charging, and constantly, also something else I run into a lot is providers always trying to compete. Like, if a competitor down the road is like lowering their cost per unit of
Mhm,
tox or filler, they feel like they need to do the same thing. I think you
yeah.
start falling into a slippery slope when you start competing on price. It's a race to the bottom, in my
Yeah.
opinion, for sure. So
100%.
I love that you brought that up. People need to be confident in charging. So
And I think you
one,
can be confident in what you charge, but still be really compassionate about people's budget.
yeah.
Like it's not one or the other, because not everybody has 10 grand to drop on filler, right? So it's not like, oh, you can't afford it, I won't do anything on you. You just, again, you
Right.
start prioritizing. Like,
Yeah.
and you can say, like, I know it's expensive. It is. The good thing is this usually lasts over a year, maybe 2 years. And we don't have to do it all at once. You want to prioritize what we do, but it's your face, it's an investment. Don't just go to someone cheap because then you're going to spend more money fixing it.
Mhm.
You can kind of be sympathetic to both arguments for sure.
Yeah. I love it. And yeah, even with younger patients too, whether it's like a younger millennial or like an older Gen Z, it's okay. Just like you said, like we don't need to do everything now.
Yeah.
And obviously, when you are educating the right way on investing in your skin and your aging process, whether it's preventative or you're trying to correct something,
Mhm.
it's the long game for sure. Aesthetics is the long game, and you don't want to necessarily turn away a patient just because they can't afford the full treatment plan. You start
Right.
small and you build, and the cool thing about younger patients entering into the marketplace, which is something I obviously love speaking on, is they have a higher lifetime value. So initially,
Mhm.
they may not be able to spend as much as a Gen X patient. If you acquire that patient and then, they stick with you over the years,
Mhm.
their income, typically most people's income increases with age. So,
Right.
that lifetime value builds
Mhm.
as it goes on. So one other question I want to add, because a struggle, let's call it, I see a lot. So I'm curious around your approach to this, and then we'll move on to another topic that somewhat ties into this, is incorporating retail products.
Mhm.
So, and I've worked with hundreds and hundreds of practices over the last 9 years, and retail, I think, is one of the biggest struggles that
Yeah.
practices tend to not capitalize on. So
Yeah.
how do you incorporate retail?
So that's a good question. So when I go through that full assessment, like I said, I usually do neurotoxin, filler, and then I go into skin. And that's either skin treatments or skincare products, and usually a combination of talking about both. So on my personal treatment plan, through this little sheet, on one side it just says I'm listing out what treatments I recommend. The whole other side is a morning, evening skincare routine. So it's one piece of paper that has everything in both. And I tend to do my facial assessments in that order because neurotoxin is the easiest to talk about. Filler adds a little bit more nuance. Honestly, the skin conversation is the longest. So I save that for last to kind of go through in all of the treatments, all of these different products to talk about for skin. And similar to the facial assessment, you're recommending maybe 10 plus products, right? If I'm going through absolute best scenario, a new cleanser, exfoliator, toner, retinol, everything, it's going to be a long list. And so then again, I can say, okay, I know looks like a lot. We're going to prioritize. I'm not going to start you on 10 new products today because what if you break out and then we don't know what your skin didn't like? So I say, okay, I'm going to prioritize. You start with essentially what I call, or what we kind of coined from ZO, getting your skin ready, where that's a good cleanser, toner, exfoliator. And then I'm going to prioritize retinol and sunscreen. And I might throw in a retinol, or I'm sorry, a vitamin C at first as well. And I'm going to send you on your way. Then we're going to
Yeah.
add in from there. And I say those are kind of my basic mainstays. Then we get into more specific patient concerns. Is it brown spots? Is it pores? Is it breakouts? Is it more anti aging, like a growth factor? I need to know which route we're going after that for what I'm recommending on top of that. And I try to give them encouragement. I'm like, if you are on a good retinol, a good vitamin C, and a good sunscreen, you're ahead of most people. So let's start there, and then we can really hunker down to get you where your skin wants to be. But you've got to start with a few at first. 10 new products at once isn't going to be good. So I think it simplifies it for them where they get used to a simple routine, and then it doesn't feel like such a big feat. The next time they come in, I add in two more things. So you're just adding in a
Yeah.
couple at a time.
Yeah. Oh, it's like a step up program
Mm-hmm.
almost
Yeah.
in some sense. Um, and I love that too. So really quickly, there's a million, I feel like we could probably talk for 6 hours. So there's one more question I want to ask you on the consultation, or just, your process in general, before and
Mm-hmm.
after photos. How do
Mm-hmm.
you take photos and use them?
Yes. Oh, Audrey, this is the bane of my existence. The photo world in aesthetics is wild out there. There's so many problems with how photography, medical photography is used online. So what I recommend and what I do is I have a single spot in my room against a blank wall with harsh overhead lighting that I take my before and after photos. The only exception for that is sometimes I'll do a photo with them leaning back for just lips. If you just want a close up of lips where it's going to be, or it's not going to look grainy if you zoomed in, everything else is upright against a wall so I can see shadow. If you put a ring light in my face, you'll never see a tear trough, a nasolabial fold, or a marionette. If you take that off and you do harsh overhead lighting, that highlights what the actual patient concern was. That's what you need to see in the photo. So the other most important part of that is making sure you're doing that in the before and after. Because what I see the most is that in the before photo, they use this harsh overhead lighting. In the after, they use a ring
Yep.
light. So
Yep.
deceptive. And
Yep.
very occasionally do I think it's maybe just a mistake, like they're just trying to beautify their photo. Most of the time, I know it's intentional. it makes them look better. So it's very deceptive. And a lot of people that aren't in medicine, or certainly that aren't in photography, wouldn't know that. So they look at that before and after and they see what they think is possible, and it's not. And then it creates this unrealistic expectation around the world. And they bring in photos, and I'm like, I can't do that for you. And I have to explain why. So
Mm-hmm.
I recommend harsh overhead lighting for all. Because some people will say, well, what if I just use the ring light in the before and the after? Then you can't see a tear trough. Then you can't see nasolabial
Yeah.
fold. I would just avoid the ring light unless you're just doing lips. I think for lips, it's okay. It just highlights the shape. Everything else, I think you need overhead lighting, consistent photo, as far as like what you use to take the photo, whether it's a camera, iPhone, iPad, just be consistent with it. In a perfect world, you'd have them wear the same color shirt in the before and after, because that can mess up your lighting. But I'm
Mm-hmm.
sympathetic to that. Like, you can't really control that. I understand people coming in different clothes. And ideally, you would have them wearing either no makeup or a similar amount of makeup in the before and after too. Again, a little bit sympathetic to that for how they come in. Those things I understand, but the lighting is fully up to you. You can change that.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah.
yeah.
Great. First of all, great pieces of advice. I could not agree more. Photos is just like you said, the whole photo conversation in this industry, it can either be super duper deceptive,
Hmm.
and just like you said, whether it's intentional or not, before and after photos can be altered, they can be deceptive, and that's obviously intentional from the provider doing it. Or in some cases, the practice just doesn't prioritize having a
Yeah.
super standardized before and after photo process in your practice. And I could go on and on about photos, as I'm sure you could, but like if we
Hmm.
put ourselves in the patient shoes, especially millennials, we did like this is a consumer analysis survey I showcase in a lot of my lectures I teach, but like we surveyed 1,000 millennial consumers. This was like about 2 years ago that were researching cosmetic treatments online, and like the number one factor that affects their initial research journey the most when choosing an aesthetic provider, so online, is photos. And
Hmm.
for some reason, it's a challenge for a lot of providers. Just like you said, you have a very standardized process. You have a specific part of the room
Hmm.
with the background, with the lighting in which you take your photos. I
Hmm.
feel like so often it'll be like the before photo is in one room with one background with a certain type of lighting. Then the after photo, different room, different lighting, different background, whatever it may be. And there's these inconsistencies, and it could have been a fabulous result, the best
Yeah.
result in the world, let's call it. But now, consumer perception, you don't know that it was a phenomenal
Right.
result. So,
You try to see if
yeah.
it's deceptive or if it's just lighting. Yeah.
Mhm. Yeah. So
Agree.
it's either one of two. Either you do it great, or it's intentional, it's deceptive, whether
Yeah.
it's accidental or not, or it's just not prioritized. And
Mhm.
it's not a super difficult thing to
Right.
fix in your
Fixed that.
practice either. It
Hmm.
just takes, some thought and strategy and prioritizing.
Yeah.
Um, Around photos too, there's one more topic I want to ask around photos. What do you say to patients that are uncomfortable with their photos being taken?
Mm. So if they like, I don't make everyone sign a photo consent to be used on social media, but they all have to have photos taken. And I just say, I
Yeah,
can't treat you unless I have a photo in the medical record.
yeah.
And I say, like, this isn't going anywhere. I was like, when you see me post photos online, I was like, there's a whole separate consent form that says, I'm going to
Mhm.
block out your name, these parts of my face can be used, etc. And I said, but we can't do any treatment unless there's a photo in the medical record. So that's your option today. And that's kind of how I do that one. Now, if you're asking for the photo consent, because that can be an awkward conversation too, a lot of providers get dicey around asking people
Mhm.
permission to use their photos. And I feel it too. Sometimes you can feel like, I don't know if this person's going to say yes, but I'd love to be able to use their photos. I'll usually we'll get done with the treatment, we'll take the after photos, I show it to them, and I say, hey, if you'd be comfortable, I'd love to show your result. This is such a good representation of what natural filler can look like. Give them a compliment. Tell them the reason I want to use is because you look so good. And if they're like, oh, I don't know, if it's just lower face, go ahead and offer to crop, and just say, what if we just crop nose down? I love to have full face before and afters, and I try to shoot for that 90% of the time. But if it's just lips or lower face, it still looks nice if it's cropped. So go ahead and offer that too. If it's something just lower face, like, what if we just cropped? Would you be okay with that? If they're still no, like, that's fine. I have some patients that'll offer just to let me use their photos in the practice. They'll say, I'm okay with you showing it to an individual, but I don't want it on your platform, essentially. I'm like,
Yeah.
okay. So I've kind of got two buckets of ones I know I can use online and ones that I can use just for specific indications to help a fellow patient. A lot of people are okay with that. You'd be surprised how many people would love to help another individual, but they just don't want it online.
Hmm. I love that. And I agree you should have the two separate
Yeah.
consents. I totally agree on that front. And then yeah, separate talk tracks for both. And I love this is something I took away from that is if you when it comes around to the conversation of gaining consent for social media or marketing efforts and to use their
Mhm.
photos, you said you give them a compliment.
Yeah.
And I feel like that's something very simple that
So
injectors
simple.
can do. And it makes the patient feel a lot more like, oh,
Yeah.
you're it can make it can reduce those barriers to saying yes, you can use my photo. So very, very easy to
Hmm.
implement, yet
Hmm.
impactful tips for
Yeah.
sure that you're giving our listeners around photo process. So I'm glad that we went into this direction for a little bit because it's something I think a lot of practices need additional assistance and insights from. So I love your process for it and your little pearls of advice. So while we're still somewhat on the clinical topic, obviously you train. You are
Mhm.
on the road all the freaking time. Like,
Yeah.
girl, you travel more than I do. So how did you? Because I feel like a lot of people have, obviously you're young, but you've been in the space
Hmm.
for 9 years, let's call it. So
Yeah.
you trained for Allergan and Revance. So like, how did that happen?
Yeah. So I've trained for both of them for several years. Right now, I'm doing more Revance and private training. So honestly, and I have people ask me this a lot too, how do you become a trainer? I would say most of the time when you get asked to be a trainer, usually it's they kind of seek people that have 5 years plus experience. Across the board, that's pretty standard. Not always, but a lot of the time kind of know that's almost a mile marker for considering you've got a good amount of experience under your belt to be considered to be a trainer. If you've been in it for a year and a half, I wouldn't get your hopes up. Like you're at that point too, you probably shouldn't be training someone else. You haven't
Hmm.
experienced a whole lot, even if you could be a great injector at that point, no doubt.
Yeah.
I think that training, it really probably is better to have a little bit more experience under your belt. You're just going to be able to field more questions as they're thrown at you. So I was about at that 5 year mark when both companies just approached me. And so they asked if I would be a trainer. Um, and there's limited spots of that available per territory for how many trainers can be in an area. So a lot of that can come down to your sales rep, your company rep seeking you out because they see, hey, she gets great results, or hey, she uses a lot of my product, whatever it may be. They see what you're doing, they see what you're pulling, and you're getting good results with what you use. They say, oh, she could help other accounts in the territory because she's getting these great results with it. Part of that with me too was I gained somewhat of this social media following back then. It wasn't as big as it is now, but I had already started down that road. And so I was getting more visibility and showing a lot of my before and afters online. So it wasn't even just my sales rep knew individually that I was doing a good job with my patients. They were seeing it more on social media. And so that really does help. That played a big role into how much I train now too, was gaining that visibility for sure.
Yeah. And I want to go into this now because obviously social media was something we were obviously going to dedicate a chunk of this episode to. So it's going to lead me into this now. So just like you said, back then you didn't have as, let's call it robust as or large of a social media following, which obviously now you have an extensive social media following. And most of our industry probably follows you. If they don't, then you guys are missing out tremendously. Certainly follow Olivia. But on the social media topic too, because obviously in this industry, you cannot shy away from social media. It's
Right.
something that you just have to do.
Hmm.
And once again, everybody starts at the bottom. Nobody
Hmm.
starts just like it, whether it's clinical, whether we're talking about business, whether we're talking about social media, every single person on planet Earth in this industry is going to start at zero posts and zero followers. So
Hmm.
talk about how did you even like enter into this influencer stage, which is
Hmm.
certainly what you've become on Instagram and TikTok. So talk a little bit about like how you started social media and how
Hmm.
how it's built, how you've built it
Yeah.
over time.
So I started my social media account probably in like 2018, a long time ago, maybe even 2017. But I started it really early on when I was injector, but I didn't give it a lot of attention back then. I would throw up before and afters, I would throw up specials. That was about it. And so I had a decent number of just local followers, but I mean, probably under 1,000, it was small. And so then it slowly crept up into the small thousands and COVID hit. And so when COVID hit, I couldn't do anything. I can't work from home as an injector. And so I was like, all right, you know what? I'm going to actually teach myself TikTok. I'm going to teach myself social media. Reels were just starting to come out. And I was like, let me figure out this algorithm to see if I can do something with it. Because I had like 6 weeks off from work. I was like, well, might as well. So I
Yeah.
wove a tapestry and I taught myself social media during COVID. Those were my two activities. But I really went through, I taught myself how to make content because I've never used a social media um, marketer. I've never hired anybody to help me. So I really just kind of taught it on my own. And one of my reasons for that is because if you do follow me, you'll see that pretty much every single thing I post is my face. It's me. So if
Yeah.
I hired somebody, what are they going to do besides put a caption on my photo or my video for me? Like I still have to film everything. But I did that intentionally because it put a personal brand to it. I think where some aesthetic accounts can get frustrated or feel like they're not gaining the traction they want is when there's not a personality behind it. And so I find it's really hard or harder to grow business accounts. It's easier to grow individual accounts because business
Yeah.
accounts have 20 people behind it. Where when it's my account, you recognize my face as soon as I scroll past you because you know me. You basically know me. And so I wanted to really put that personal spin on my page and add more than just putting up my before and after photos and putting up just our specials and promos. It gives you a lot more content to post. I cannot, like these accounts that I see that are all before and afters, more power to them. That's so hard to get full face consented before and afters where they come in for a follow up with a great result 5 days a week. That's very hard. And so I think it gives you a lot more just length of what you can do when you're not focusing on just posting before and afters all the time. You've got yourself with it too. I can't tell you how many times I've had a patient come in and say, I feel like I already know you because I follow you. They're instantly more comfortable with me. They know my personality, they know what I like, they know my cat boo. It's just, if you already have so much to talk about, it makes conversation easier. We can joke about when I make fun of myself on social media. The personality plays into it a lot. So one of my biggest tips that I talk about, and I talked about this at AES with Audrey, but is a lot of people ignore TikTok because they think, well, it's well, one, some people think it's just going to get banned, but then some people think it's just a bunch of 14-year-olds on there, and it is so not. There's so many older people on TikTok. There's a lot of potential patients on there. And every trend you see on Instagram was on TikTok 2 weeks ago. So if you're on TikTok, you're going to be ahead of every trend. That is how a lot of my growth happened. I got on TikTok. I see everything that's going to come down the pipeline, and you just get ahead of the trends. You stay on the cutting edge a little bit easier. I also just think TikTok's a little bit more user friendly for creating content. So I just recommend if you're going to put the time and effort into creating it, why not post it on multiple platforms? You might as well
Yeah.
help yourself out. Because I kind of felt that way at first too. I probably already had 30 something, maybe 40 something thousand followers on Instagram when I made my TikTok. So I had what, 2 followers on TikTok. And so you can
Mm-hmm.
kind of feel like, well, that's never going to catch up, right? I'll post on both, but it's never going to catch up. And now it's inverse. I have more on TikTok than I do on Instagram. So it's worth it. And you can get that growth. Just don't be nervous of those first days when you have 2 or 3 followers.
Mm-hmm.
And I recommend being really consistent. The algorithm will punish you when you get inconsistent.
Yep.
And I've felt that because I've gone through little phases where maybe I wasn't as diligent with it, took a little break on, like I went to on a European vacation like 4 years ago, 3 years ago, and I took like 3 weeks off from posting. I didn't put anything, and I felt it when I got back on. I was like, oh, no one's seeing any of my content. So you really try to be as consistent as you can. Consistent to me looks like 4 grid posts a week and stories every single day. I don't think weekends are the best time to post a grid post. It doesn't get as great of engagement. So Monday to Friday, and maybe take one of those days off, but try to be about 4 days consistent if you can. And stories are easy. Put a story up every single day. My bubble should be at the front of someone's feed every single day.
Mm-hmm.
Otherwise, you kind of get forgotten about a little bit, right? So it could even just be me taking a picture of the filler tray that I'm doing that day, taking a picture of my hydrogen water bottle, anything that's just somewhat relevant. It takes 5 seconds.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah.
I love that. And there's a million things I want to ask you now, but I
Mhm.
guess where I first want to start is to back up a little bit, because you brought it up is in order to, let's call it, see success and
Mhm.
growth on social media, there has to be, or it has to be personality centric.
Yeah.
So I want to stop here for a moment because so many people, and when we are all what so, some of us are natural extroverts and that's great, but a lot of people in the industry are very uncomfortable getting
Hmm.
in front of a camera.
Yeah.
So what pieces of advice do you have? Because I know a million of our listeners are going to be in this bucket of people where it's nauseating to get in front of a camera
Hmm.
and film themselves. Like what
Yeah.
pieces of advice do you have for them?
Yeah. So I think with more introverted people, they get more nervous about trends because they're silly. There's more room for embarrassment. So, I felt that early on too. If I'm making like a stupid video that I just think is funny, there's certainly more room to like feel embarrassed with that. So, at a very early point, I just decided I wasn't going to care about that. But that can be hard for an introvert. So, I think the content that introverts might enjoy creating more is just educational content, which is honestly what thrives the most. It does the best.
Hmm.
It's maybe hard to come up with educational content 4 to 5 days a week, but it does really, really well. So if you can sit yourself down and you're not filming like an Instagram live, because live can be very stressful as well. It's pre-recorded content, so you can mess up as many times as you want and refilm. I think that could be maybe be their niche for someone that's really nervous about being on camera doing something outgoing. Just film what you know. You already know the anatomy. You know these things. Just literally act like you're doing a little patient consultation. Put the camera up, let yourself do 10 takes, and then you've got content to post. And it's just what you're doing with your patients anyway. But I feel for that. Like that is hard. To get the confidence to go behind camera is hard. I'm an extroverted extrovert, so I thrive on people making fun of me, but I know that's not everybody. So
Yeah,
yeah.
good piece of advice. And that's a really good tip is if you're introverted, there's still other avenues that you can go down, just
Hmm.
like you said, creating educational content. And I feel like we all, whether we are uncomfortable with, doing these things or not, the more you do anything, the more comfortable you become
True.
naturally. So
Yeah.
for a lot of, people that are more introverted in nature,
Hmm.
and that's just like who they are to their core. I know so many introverts in this industry that have become massive public speakers or
Yeah.
become really, really big on social media. Like once you do anything enough times,
Hmm.
you just naturally get more comfortable with it. And then you can move into, the areas of being funny and making fun of yourself. And like the algorithm likes that too, because if it creates a lot of engagement, it typically does well. And I love how much you make fun of yourself. I love it. Like even recently you posted your, a couple of days ago, your Halo
Oh yeah.
or
I
BBL.
bring it up
Yeah.
all the time. I have it
Yeah.
saved like on my phone for when patients ask me about a halo. I'm like, want to see mine? Because yeah,
Yeah.
it's alarming. But yeah, people
Yeah.
relate to that too. Like in your
Hmm.
head, you can think, oh, is this embarrassing? But actually, people just like to feel related to. So,
Yes.
and I think for introverts too, once they post a couple things like that and they realize no one's making fun of them and people are actually relating to it and laughing with them, it gives you more of the confidence to keep doing it. Same thing with training and speaking. Like I was nervous the first couple times I did big presentations, even as an extrovert. Like it really is daunting until you get some under your belt and you realize you can do it and it's gonna be fun.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, so true. So true. And there's a ton of things I could ask you. So on the speaking thing, actually, no, if I back up, back to the just being authentic, I feel like something else that can hinder some people in the social media aspect too is they care about what other people think of them. And
Yeah.
I think the sooner, so I'm curious to hear your insight on this. I think the sooner you can move away from that of not caring what other people's perceptions or
Hmm.
opinions of are you,
Hmm.
the better off you will be. When you're constantly trying to be everything to everyone, I
Yeah.
think that's something that massively hinders growth, whether we're talking about speaking, whether we're talking about social media. So I'm curious if you have any insights into that.
Yeah, that's really hard because it's such human nature to care what people think about you, right? That it's hard to kind of drop that piece of it. But what I try to give people encouragement on with social media posts specifically, if you're getting a bunch of like troll type comments in your social media post, congratulations, that means your content went viral. Trolls only come out on the discover page and the for you page. They're not your followers. You went viral. Congrats. So take it as a compliment. So when I start to get any kind of trolling comment on something, I'm like, oh, is this video doing well? So use it that way and just know you're never going to make everyone happy. You've got to
Mhm.
realize that early, that not everyone's going to get your jokes, whatever it may be. And so it's just you kind of get a little numb to it in a good way though. Numb to the sense that I'm like, I'm not bothered by any of it. If I see some of that on there, one of my
Yeah.
coworkers recently brought up one. She's like, "Did you see what this person commented on your photo?" And they said something. It was some video that got trolling comments because it went like more viral. And someone said, "It looks like your skeleton is trying to escape your body." And I didn't know what they meant, but I thought it was so funny. And it was just a random follower. And they were like, "Are you not offended?" And I was like, "No, neither of us know what that means. How is my skeleton trying to escape my face?" But, people just say crazy things and you'll get used to it.
Yeah. No, I love that. And I feel like that's applicable to a lot of things in
Yeah.
life, just in life and business, regardless of what we're talking about. And something that also comes is let's call it the more influential you become in the
Mhm.
industry, the more, let's call it haters, if we want to use that term, you're going to get, whether it's trolls
Yeah.
on social media, whatever it may be. That just comes as a part of the package as
Yes.
you build your influence in the space. So whether it's speaking, whether it's training, whether it is building your social media, there's always going to be people out there that are not going to like you. And the larger you
Mhm.
get, the more people that there are going to be that don't like you.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, the sooner you can be uncomfortable with just not being everyone's cup of tea,
Yeah.
I think it does everyone a lot of benefit once you reach that stage and you're just super confident in who you are, and you just stay true to your true authentic self, because your vibe attracts your tribe at the end of the day. So on the topic of public
Mhm.
speaking, because this is something I wanted to touch on too. Obviously, you're 31, you public
Mhm.
speak all the time. You
Mhm.
have this social media following. You've done all of these things. You train globally, let's call it. So I want to ask you this specifically because I know it's something I struggled with
Mhm.
early on when I started public speaking, which I started public speaking at age 24.
Mhm.
How do you deal with people taking you seriously when you're
Mhm.
first starting
Mhm.
out at a young age? Do you have any?
Yeah. Oh, that's a
Yeah.
great question. So I feel like when I've felt like I needed to prove myself more was sometimes when I'm speaking to someone that has a lot more experience than me, right? And so that's where I would really prepare for presentations if I knew I was training like a plastic surgeon. I was like, I'm a nurse. They're a plastic surgeon with 20 years experience and I'm coming in to teach them filler. I need to be super, like, I just make sure I'm as prepared as I can be. And then I can't really get nervous because I did everything I could. But I made sure I knew my anatomy backhand, forehand because they have more hands-on experience with anatomy than me. I just probably have more knowledge on this rheology than they do and how to inject because they're more on the surgical side. But I feel like when I focused on just being really science minded, for obviously that's going to be different for you versus me because your business. I felt like that helped me be taken seriously, even though I'm young, where I think some people maybe go the route of trying to just be like best friends with the people that they're training. And I always want to be friends with the people I'm training too. But going the route of, hey, we're really going a medical direction with it has always really helped me. And then I'll get more of the comments of, wow, you know so much for your age. I was surprised, or they maybe weren't necessarily thinking they were going to get a lot out of that training. Um, and I think that's always been really helpful. And I back up pretty much everything I say with some type of research article. I've got something to reference that if they disagree with me, I'm not just going to go back and forth with them, but say, yeah, that's interesting. I kind of saw this in this research. I'd love to see your take on that. Or maybe you could look into mine and we can kind of go back and forth on it that way. But it helps to back yourself up so that if they do question you, you know exactly where you're sourcing.
Yeah. And those are some really good tips. Did you ever struggle on, more so, I guess, if we move from training to public speaking and getting in
Mm,
on a stage and speaking in front of, whether it's a group of 50 people or, AES had, how many people in the room?
yeah,
750 that we spoke in front
yeah.
of. On the topic of that, do you think that at any point in time you got into your head of the age thing of like, I am so young and I'm speaking about this in front of a
Hmm.
room full of people that have been in the industry longer than I
Yeah,
have, like from the speaking on the stage part, so if you're not in a training and someone can't shout, like, well,
right.
go more into this, like if you're actually giving a presentation?
Yeah. Early on, for sure, imposter syndrome's real, right?
Yeah.
So I definitely felt that early on. Probably just nerves of being in front of people too, whether it's about how much you think you know or not. Just speaking in front of that many people can be very daunting. But I think like the way that once you get more comfortable with it too, you convey that a lot in your body language, just how you kind of present on stage, how you hold yourself. Are you fidgeting? Is your voice breaking? Are you standing still, kind of hunched over? Are you commanding the room, looking at different people? I think you convey it a lot in your body language, and people trust what you're saying with how you convey a message. And I tried to start doing that a lot more as I started public speaking more, because early on I'm sure I stuttered a bit or repeated myself, something that would convey I'm nervous. And you start
Hmm.
working on that because you mess up. You do it early on, you realize it, you're like, okay, next time I'm not going to do that. How do I prevent
Yep.
that? Part of that for me too is I know my slide deck basically memorized. I could turn it behind
Yep.
me, not even look, and I know what's about to happen. If you're not familiar with
Mhm.
the slide deck, you're going to get uncomfortable. And sometimes you get put in that situation, and I hate it. If I'm going into a training or a program, they're like, here, we'll send you the deck the day of. I'm like, no, you won't. You'll send it to me a week early because I want to know it really well because it's my reputation on the line. If I give a bad
Yep.
presentation, that's on me. And it doesn't look good for the company either. So I be really, really prepared. Memorize, know your stuff, convey with your body language, slow down your speech. I'm someone that
Mhm.
I sometimes get in trouble talking like a machine gun. I talk so fast
Yep.
normally that when I'm presenting, I'm like, slow down. Not everybody can listen as fast as you talk. So that can help you too, just trying to slow yourself down. Um, but otherwise, I think that I've always been pretty comfortable speaking. It was just kind of fine tuning some of those things. Um, yeah, I think that's most of everything I kind of
Yeah.
have to help with that. Breathing
No, I
exercises. I like to do a little Wim Hof breathing beforehand sometimes if I get nervous.
hmm No,
Yeah.
these are really, really great tips. And I agree with them. The body language thing is so
Mm,
real, just like you said. And at first, once again, we're always going to be uncomfortable. And then once you start doing it more often, you get more comfortable and you start getting more into your, momentum and finding your groove and things like that. And, yeah, commanding the room, like you're not going to do that when you first start, unless
right.
you're just naturally incredible at it,
Born
which
with it. Hmm.
I don't think many people are. I think
Yeah.
any skill in life is typically acquired over
Yeah.
time of just doing it, whether we're introverted or extroverted. And I'm like you, I'm an extrovert 110%.
Yeah.
So yeah, the body language thing, preparing, absolutely.
Mhm.
Preparation is probably something that separates a large portion of the world's population, is
Yeah.
simply just being prepared. And
Yeah.
just like you said, your slide deck so well that if the AV went out, and that happens a
Hmm.
lot in this industry,
Yeah.
there are AV issues all the time. If that PowerPoint or that TV goes out, that screen
Hmm.
projector, what are you going to do? So there have been so many times where I literally am like, it's okay, and you
We'll
just
keep
roll with the
going.
punches because
Yep.
yeah, exactly. That's something that happens very often. And instead of actually there was a time I was at a conference. It was probably last year I was speaking at, and there were tech issues in the room. Okay, so
Mm.
I'm cool with it. I'll just wing it and speak
Yeah.
from the heart of whatever topic I was speaking on. And I remember the speaker in front of me was like getting so angry and frustrated and yelling at the AV guy in front of a room of like 100 people. And I was sitting there like, this is so embarrassing to even. And
Yeah.
then first of all, you're losing your credibility if you're doing
Mm.
that, because that's so rude to the other people that are there spending their Saturday working and
Right.
trying to, put on a conference. So I love that. Preparation is key. If you
Yeah.
don't know the material in and out, you probably shouldn't be presenting on it
Yeah.
as well.
100%.
And then talking fast, breathing. I'm just like you, I'm a really fast talker. And that was
Yeah.
something I had to perfect when I started public speaking, is I talk so fast.
Yeah.
And you have to, the breathing, taking breaths in between words was something that really helped me get over that. Cause that was probably
Mhm.
one of my biggest issues when I first started, was I just talk fast and we're just
Yeah.
excited. Like we just know the
Yeah.
material. We just want to keep talking. And it's like other people typically don't know the material as well as you do. So for them,
Right.
it can be, a little bit more difficult. So these are
And
all
that can be
good.
a hard thing to get through to yourself is as soon as I say it, I assume you've retained it. Just
Mhm.
because I have memorized it. And so it's in my head 'cause I went through it 20 times, right? Where for you, maybe I need to slow down, say it twice because we retain what, 30% of what somebody says. And so I kind of had to reteach myself some of that with presenting, like, okay, just because I said it once doesn't mean it was retained. Do cliff notes, go
Yeah.
back and recap some of those things and talk slow through it. And if you do run into an issue with AV or you lose your train of thought, open up Q&A, let people ask questions
Hmm.
just to keep it kind of organic too.
Yeah. Good points. And also on the topic of memorizing, let's call it.
Mm.
Like you need to know the material. Yes. Something I've run into is, and at the very beginning, obviously, I prepared a lot. I
Yeah.
would rehearse and on all of these things. And something I learned along the way is if you get too caught up in completely memorizing, if something happens in the middle of that
Mhm.
lecture, your brain will completely go blank because you won't know.
Yeah.
So if you have any insight into that, because that's something I've totally moved away from. At the beginning, obviously, we're trying to overly prepare, especially when we're
Yeah.
very young. Let's call it in our 20s, and we're public speaking on stage. Like we want to over prepare. And
Yeah.
something I learned over now, I've gotten to a point where I really don't prepare at all, just because the material and the stuff I speak
Know
on
it.
is niche. I know it inside and out. I have the
Yeah.
research behind it and stuff like that. So I just now I'm at a point where I wing it, but you don't
Mhm.
get to that point,
Yeah.
obviously. So do you have any more insight into things like that?
Yeah, no, that's a good point because I've definitely gotten myself in hot water with that before where I've basically like got this little script in my mind of what I need to
Mhm.
do for like a mini presentation. And it's almost like if you skip one sentence in the script you prepared, then you don't know what comes next. And I'll sit there and I'll go, oh no, where was I going with that? So if it's new content, because kind of like you, I have certain things I present on that it's like it's common knowledge to me. It's just
Yeah.
it's so second nature. But if it's something newer, new medicine, new research that I do need to prepare more for, I memorize or prepare my internal script in compartments. That way,
Yes.
let's say in the second compartment I've gone into, one little piece I forgot to say because we're human, I'm not thrown off for every compartment. I can just jump into compartment C, right? So I do that more now. Instead of it being one long winded flow, there's just
Hmm.
pieces. There's pieces I know I need to hit. If you miss one, you miss one, but it doesn't mess up the whole flow like it used to for me, especially when I was early on making like TikTok videos. And I was making an educational video. I'd sit down in my head, I had like a 30-second script of exactly what I needed to say. I'd get through 20 seconds of it, miss a sentence, and then I'd blank. So, yeah, I've tried to get away from that too because it really can mess you up. When you had
Hmm.
it perfect and now you know you've missed something, it drives you nuts.
Yeah, it's hard to go back on track. And
Mhm.
I like how
Yeah.
you said you break it up into compartments. I think this is a good piece of advice for anyone who is aspiring to public speak in the industry, because I couldn't agree more with it, is breaking it into compartments. So if it's obviously in some cases, just like you said, it's material that we just know in and out, we could give it in our sleep,
Mhm.
whatever, that specific course topic is. And on other ones, you just need to have those buckets of compartments. So how
Yes.
I typically do it, and I like how you said it, is I know how I'm going to start. I know like the main points I want to hit and then how I'm going to
Mhm.
end it. But the intricate details in between, I'll
Yeah.
just kind of figure out as I
Mhm.
go. And then, that is something that helps you because there's always people in the room that'll shout a question or like do
Mhm.
something that totally just
Interrupt. Yeah.
distracts you and you totally get thrown off guard. And so having it more of like a flexible flow, if that
Yeah.
is the
Bullet
correct
points. Yeah.
wording even, it helps a lot. So I think that was a really good piece of advice for everyone in the industry that is either aspiring to train public speak or is doing it now and they're thinking
Mhm.
of ways to improve. I think breaking it up into that template is certainly really, really helpful. And then something else I'll add is on the social media thing too, having your personality as the forefront of it. And I think the same goes for public speaking. And I want to hear your insights onto this as well. But I think the sooner you become so in tune with who you are as a human and how your speaking style is, and being okay that you're not going to be everyone's cup of tea on stage, and being okay that there's some people in the room that probably are going to be triggered by you, whatever, if it's a
Mhm.
large room, let's typically say. The sooner
Yeah.
you're just so confident in yourself that it does not matter, I
Mhm.
think that's when you kind of unlock a new level of like
Yeah.
public speaking, if that makes any sense. But if you have anything to add to that, I think it'd be cool to hear.
I agree. Yeah, because it can be so bland if you don't bring any of your personality into your presentation. It's just bullet point facts at that point. So, yeah, throw in a joke, throw in a little story about yourself if it relates to what you're talking about, something to make it personalized and just keep their attention. Ask questions to the audience. Don't just wait for Q&A for you, rhetorical questions even, but just something to keep it almost engaging, even if it is just a lecture. Make it
Yeah.
feel like a round table, even if it's a huge room, to where they feel like they can speak up if they need to. I try to keep it really non-intimidating to ask me
Hmm.
questions. I think that's one of the things that presenters or trainers, whatever it may be, do wrong a lot, is they are so hard with what they know. There's no other
Yeah.
way to look at it, that people won't ask them questions because they're terrified. And so I always want it to be like, yes, you can ask me anything. Like, I don't care. We can talk through it. I think a lot of people are intimidated and intimidating.
Hmm. I love that. And it's funny you brought that up. So I was actually recording a podcast earlier with Dr. Gretchen Freeling. I was on her podcast and
Love
we were talking
Gretchen.
about public speaking. I love her dearly. And she asked me like, what is like the one thing that, quality that you want people to get from public speaking? It's just like what you said. And my answer to her was to just be really approachable.
Yeah.
And that's exactly what you're saying. And I couldn't agree more. Like I think it is a mistake that some speakers make is yes, you are the expert in whatever you
Mhm.
are talking about. But at the end of the day, public speaking really isn't about you. It's about
Mhm.
helping the people in the room.
Yeah.
And if you are there with genuine intentions of
Mhm.
it's not about you. It's not the Audrey show. It's not the Olivia show. It's to
Mhm.
help people, right? It's to
Yeah.
help whoever you're training or you're speaking to and to be as approachable as you possibly can. I think that's when people really gravitate towards you because then they sense
Mhm.
it and that you're authentic, you're relatable, to go back to that term that you used on social media as well. Like just being approachable and kind and
Yeah.
humble and nice. And those things go a really long way.
Really long
Um,
way.
mhm. So I love that you brought that up because it was funny because I literally just had a similar conversation with Gretchen earlier. But I know we're winding down on time. So, and I feel like I could talk to you for hours and hours and
I
hours.
know.
So I can't believe it's been almost an hour. So I want to, and we talked about a lot. We covered a lot of ground, which I love. But if we end on some positive notes, let's call it, or not even positive. Well, everything's positive in this industry because it's a really exciting time to be a part of it. But what like future predictions do you
Mm.
have for aesthetics? It can be clinical, whatever it may be. Like what are
Yeah.
some future predictions you have for the industry?
So I feel like, I mean, we're seeing such a boom of regenerative medicine, longevity medicine, all these different terminologies to kind of encompass functional medicine, I think is kind of the umbrella term. But that's being incorporated more and more into our practices for sure. And neurotoxin and filler aren't going anywhere, but
Right.
people are really interested in wellness from within. And I think that it's a good idea for these aesthetic practices to build that in to where it's not just looking younger, it's being younger, it's making your cells behave younger. And you can tie that into marketing even. And that's true. If
Mhm.
your cells behave younger, they will look younger on the outside too. So it's aesthetic, even though it's wellness. So that's really getting a lot of attention. And I spoke on that at AES about like the potential with NAD, NMN, all of these longevity pathways and supplementation in IVs. But with some of those, and in my presentation, I went full into this, is knowing the research behind it. You've got to understand the research behind it because there's pros and cons. And so if the
Mhm.
patient asks you about it, hey, there's this, I saw this article about pancreatic cancer in mice with NAD. You need to know that that exists. You need to know what was the end result, what were the predisposing factors. If you're going to put that in someone's IV, know it. Know everything about it. Don't just bring it on because it's trendy. That's a problem with our industry is there's a lot trendy. People just bring it on because they
Mhm.
heard it did this, that, and the other. Know it like the back of your hand if you're going to put your name behind it. So I'm pretty
Yep.
slow to bring something on. I am not someone that's just going to say, yeah, let's bring this onto the practice, sell it to everybody until I'm pretty confident it works. And sometimes that can feel like you're not staying on the cutting edge because you're not bringing on everything new. But I know if I offer it to my patient, it's amazing. I
Yeah.
fully back it. So there's pros and cons to both of that. But yeah, I think a lot of that, those IVs and this wellness craze is going to be big in our industry. There's a lot with hyperbaric oxygen chambers going on right now, not just for wound healing, but for health and wellness as well, almost like a membership type thing. And
Mhm.
then I'm trying to think of what else. Spermidine and berberine and injecting peptides, I think is going to be really big
Yep.
soon. And then have you heard of Ariescence yet?
I don't think so.
Okay, so that is in my opinion, going to fully just bulldoze over exosomes. The science behind it's really,
Wow.
really fascinating. If you've not looked into it, it's platelet-derived growth factors, and that doesn't sound like a new terminology, right? We know
Right.
PRP, we know growth factors, but essentially, I'll be really brief with this, but it's very interesting. What you get out of your PRP, the main thing I want when I draw your blood for PRP is platelet-derived growth factor. That's what I'm trying to
Mhm.
source. And so when I draw your PRP, I only get like a 4 to 5 times increase in concentration of it. So it's increased, but it's not significant. With Ariescence, which is recombinant platelet-derived growth factor, you get it's 1,000 to 300,000 times what you get out of PRP. It's
Wow.
massive, massive. And that's because it's predictable. When I draw your blood, it's so variable
Yep.
if you're healthy
Yep.
or not. And even if you are healthy, some people just don't get that good of a batch. So it's
Mhm.
very like predictable, massive increase in this growth factor. And the message is clear compared to exosomes. Depending on where it's sourced from, you can have good messages in the body, you can have bad. Not every message is good. So there are these messengers. It has to be specific to wound healing. So that's going to be a big thing, in my opinion. So watch out for that one. But it's really
I
interesting. That one is probably the most exciting thing I've heard in our industry in 4 years, truly.
I love it. I love your forecasts of the
Yeah.
industry, and I certainly see, I think it's really cool that we're now seeing, because I feel like for a while aesthetics almost had like not tunnel vision, but like wellness,
Mm-hmm.
and a lot of these things had like the anti-aging, because I've worked in the anti-aging and wellness and functional medicine
Mm-hmm.
vertical in addition to aesthetics too. And it's almost like for a while there was like tunnel vision between the two, and now we're finally seeing like the coupling of them
Yeah.
together, which I think is going to be a massive driver of global growth. Absolutely. And
Yeah.
obviously with that comes controversial topics as well and things like that. So it'll be cool to see how the
Mm-hmm.
industry evolves over the
Yeah.
next,
Emerging.
3 to 5 years. Yep, yep.
Yeah.
But I love it, and I think it's so cool that we've gone into this approach of how you can really treat someone truly from the inside out
Mm-hmm.
now, enhance longevity and everything. So I think I love this industry just like you. Like I just something I love about it is just the amount of innovation that we constantly have. And I think it
Constantly.
is just so exciting. It's such an amazing time to be in this industry.
Mm-hmm.
And I know I feel very blessed and grateful, and I know you feel the same way.
Yeah.
But
Yeah. It's
it's
amazing.
it's
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 always
a really cool
changing.
time
You're
to
never caught up. I feel like you're
yeah.
always hearing something new that someone brings up to you. You're like, well, I haven't heard of that yet. So yeah.
Hmm. Yeah, I love it. So what is next for you? Any upcoming events where people can find you? And obviously, most people probably follow you on social, but in case there's, some people on this podcast that don't, where they can find you on social outlets too.
Yes. Okay. So in basically a month, in October, I'm going to be speaking at CCR in London. And so that's one of their big conferences every year, just a global aesthetic conference. So I'll be speaking on neurotoxin differences there. And then otherwise, conference wise, I don't have another one till next year. It's mostly trainings up until then, private and through Revance. So I'm building out more private trainings where people can come to Nashville and see me.
Nice.
And then I'm also talking through a partnership with, Tracy Olson.
Mhm. Yeah,
Mhm.
love her.
Yeah, just with her Aesthetic Injector Academy to be able to get
Yep.
CEUs for like this baseline training of people that are trying to get into aesthetics and they don't know where to start. Where you can
Hmm.
do this online course, get really in-depth anatomy, get some CEUs for it, and then you jump into hands-on. So that's something I'm going to be working with as well to kind of help people get their feet wet with it. And then the hands-on trainings will be kind of coming more. I'll post them on my social for private trainings in Nashville. But yeah.
Cool. Love it. But yeah, on the Tracy
Yeah.
Olson topic too, because I did a podcast with her on this show it was probably some point last year, but for our listeners
Mm,
on, if you're interested in learning more about it, because it's a gap in the industry that she's 100%
yes.
solving for. I strongly encourage going back into the show history, and you can certainly find that episode with her. It's Aesthetic Injector Academy, as you said. But also,
Mhm.
where can people find you on social really quickly before we wind down?
Oh yeah. My TikTok is just Olivia Salmen, and then my Instagram is Olivia Salmen underscore aesthetics.
Love it. Well, Olivia, it's been so wonderful to connect with you.
Oh,
I have a lot an immense amount of respect and admiration for you. You're certainly an
Yes.
inspiration for me. I'm so grateful that we've become friends and had our
Me
paths
too.
cross, but I feel very grateful that you were able to carve out some of your busy schedule to come on the True to Form podcast. So from the bottom of my heart, I want to say thank you.
Always, Audrey. Thank you for having me. I was excited to do it. We'll do another episode another day.
Yeah, absolutely. We'll do a part two because there is a
Oh,
lot
yes.
more that we could
There's so much.
unpack. I'm like, I have so many notes. I
Yeah.
always take notes. I'm just like writing things down, and there were probably a million other things we could go into. So yes, our
Yeah.
listeners can expect a part two in the future. But until
Thanks.
then, I want to thank
Mhm.
you for coming on the show, and yeah, we'll certainly expect a part two in the future. So thank you again, Olivia.
Absolutely. Thank you, Audrey, and thank you everyone for listening.